What is your full name?
My full name is Mitsuru Kubota.
Where were you born?
I was born in a place called New Mill, Elele, Kauai, territory of Hawaii.
When were you born?
I was born on September 25th, 1932.
And what was your occupation?
My occupation when? Now?
Sure, what's your occupation now?
I am retired.
But what was your occupation when you were working?
When I was working, I was a professor of chemistry.
Where were you a professor?
I was a professor at Harvey Mudd College, Claremont, California.
And what is your educational background?
My educational background, from the latest, had a PhD in chemistry from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana.
What were the full names of your parents?
The full names of my parents. My mother's name was Kiyono Nakashima, and my father was Giichi Kubota.
And what did they do for a living?
My father was a boiler maker, repaired boilers of locomotives. My mother was a housewife, a janitor, and a washerwoman.
And what were their educational backgrounds?
The educational background, my mother was educated in Hanapepe, but left for Japan at the age of 10 and was in Japan for 6 years before she returned to Hanapepe, Kauai. Then she was sent back because her inability to speak English was sent back to the 3rd grade. And she begged her parents to drop out of school. My father was trained to be a teacher, but left for Peru, South America, where he was a cook. And after 5 years in Peru, his boss asked him to go to Japan to get a wife, but the ship that he sailed in had stopped in Hawaii, Honolulu, where he did not have any papers to go to disembark. He instead jumped ship. He was a wetback. And his brother-in-law picked him up on a rowboat. So he is an illegal alien, wetback person without proper papers.
And so he made the plans to coordinate with his brother in advance through letters, or?
No, it was like, I don't know how they communicated to his sister that he was on board on the ship.
And do you think he planned to jump ship for a while before he did?
No, I think it was his intent to, simply go back to Japan to get a wife.
But then he decided at the last minute to
jump. He, because he had a sister in Honolulu and a brother on the island of Kauai, he, simply decided that this is where he would be, Hawaii.
And then how did your parents meet?
Well, apparently my father my father was 16 years older than my mother and saw a strong young lady, 16, and apparently carrying her father, who was injured by a horse. And so my father said, well, there's a strong girl that I'd like to have as my wife.
And then how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Well, I had one brother who died as an infant, two sisters who also died at a very young age. Then I had one other sister and three brothers. So apparently, you might say a family of eight, but living would be one sister and three brothers.
And what was your childhood like?
What was there?
Well, your childhood.
What was there?
What was it like growing up with your brothers and sisters?
Well, those are very vague memories. But remember what happened was that Pearl Harbor was attacked when I was 9 years old. My older brother, was 7 years older than me, 16, and my sister, 11. Two younger brothers, both 7 and 4 years old.
And so did Pearl Harbor have a big impact on your childhood?
Well, those are vague memories. Then when the war came, we said that, well, we do not speak the enemy language. My mother, who was born in Hanapepe, Kauai, spoke English and Japanese, but she was sent from the age of 10 to 16 to Japan, and she was more comfortable, therefore, to speak Japanese, but still understood English.
Right. So did your siblings play a role in learning English? Like, did your little brother learn English from your older siblings?
No, we all spoke Pidgin English. Yeah.
And where you grew up on a plantation?
Yes, I grew up in a place called New Mill because there was a new sugar mill built there. It is now referred to as New Mila, Niumila.
And did you ever work on the plantation?
I worked at the age of 14 or 15 on the plantation, just a few, might say, months with a hoe and removing weeds.
And what was the community like, the Japanese community?
The Japanese community was very tight. We knew all of the families and almost all of the boys. It was very small. My guess is that there must have been about 300 to 400 people, Japanese. But then there was a Portuguese camp and a Filipino camp and what we called the haoles, the bosses. Yeah.
And did you get along with the Portuguese?
Well, we really did not play with them except whatever contact we had in school. But the Japanese community was very tight, and we, you might say, played together.
Right.
But there was a missionary from England, Captain John Smith, who had organized. Well, he came from Ele, which is about 2 miles away, to the village, and he had Sunday school for us. And so we had, you might say, Boy Scouts and church activities.
And so that was a Christian?
Yes, so the background was that we were Christians. Our parents were, you might say, Buddhist. My father was a Buddhist, religious, and he recited prayers, and we were required to sit as he recited the prayers every evening.
Did he find it strange when the missionary came and then he had Boy Scouts and Sunday
No,
school?
he simply accepted the fact that the missionary and his the church activities, but there was no, as far as he was concerned, he didn't care.
Okay. And do you think that having the missionary in that Sunday school affected your religious identity?
Well, it did in the sense that that's the only religion that I really knew. I was quite unaware of, Buddhist or other Japanese religions. My religion was simply, you might say, Anglican, Episcopal. I was baptized and confirmed in the, you might say, the Christian faith.
Did your parents baptize you?
I'm sorry?
Did your parents baptize you?
No.
Okay.
Baptism was at the Anglican church.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you experienced religion more in the community than you did from your parents?
From my parents, yes. So as far as my parents were concerned, there was no, you might say, influence on the part of my parents.
Right.
On my religion.
So since you grew up in a majority Japanese community,
yes.
And then when you went on to college at University of Hawaii, was it still majority Japanese or?
Well, when I went to college, I was, you might say, the Anglican Church, Episcopal Church, was the only church that I knew of. And what happened is that there was a clubhouse for Episcopal students, and there was the Canterbury Club, a place where I had my lunch. I always brought my lunch to school, and it was a place where I had my lunch.
And were there mostly Japanese students at University of
No,
Hawaii?
they were mostly Asians, about an equal number of Chinese and Japanese.
So was it a shock at all when you came to the mainland, when you went to grad school? Was it a shock when you went to grad school?
No. There was no influence whatever. In fact, what happened is coming from, you might say, a sugar plantation as contrasted to being with the big city girls. I was a person, you might say, who was a country hick, spoke pidgin English.
And so you liked living in Illinois? Did you like living in Illinois?
Well, it was only natural. What happened was that after 4 years in Honolulu, where I went to college, I was in fact a member of the Canterbury Club, and the people in Honolulu decided they would make me president of the Canterbury Club. But then the girls in the club took care of everything for me.
But how did that affect your decision to go to grad school? How did you decide to go to graduate school?
Now, as far as graduate school is concerned, the only thing I knew was that I enjoyed helping my fellow classmates in their studies of chemistry. And I always usually prepared over the material because I anticipated questions that they might ask me. And so that is, you might say, how I decided I would be a chemist, a chemistry professor.
So in undergrad, you helped your fellow classmates and you prepared materials for them?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Did a lot of people from the community where you grew up go on to graduate school?
Not very many, but actually what happened is two of my neighbors, that is people who live within 2 or 3 houses away from me, coming from a sugar plantation, backward hick town, eventually became professors, one in Oregon and the second in Kansas.
And then what was it like? Had you ever been to the mainland before you went to graduate school?
No. In fact, after 4 years at the University of Hawaii, I was in the Army, and primarily because the Korean War, started in 1950 when I graduated, and in fact I would have joined the Army because the older people that I knew, there were just no jobs available, and I thought that the only thing that I could do would be to simply join the Army, as many of my classmates did.
That was after high school or after?
Right after high school.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, what happened was that several of my high school classmates were killed in the Korean War, and some other of my classmates, trying to avoid going to Korea, tried to join the Navy, and many of them, in fact, joined the Coast Guard so that they would not have to go to Korea.
But you did go to Korea?
No, I did not go to Korea. I went to the university, and all students were required to be in the ROTC, the Reserve Officers Training Corps. And not knowing what I was going to do, I was simply got up and followed the line. And when I got to the head table, the lady said, or the Army personnel said, infantry. I said, what? Well, he was assigning people to the Air Force, the artillery, or the infantry. And when they said infantry, I had no choice but to be with the infantry. That was the last time I stood in line not knowing what or why I was standing in line for. I learned a lesson.
And so then where were you? Where did they send you?
Well, after 2 years of ROTC classes, which was required, then we went to what they call advanced ROTC in the junior and senior year. And 2 weeks after I graduated from the university, I was sent to Georgia at the Infantry Officers School in Fort Benning, Georgia.
And then you went to training there?
And there I was, trained to be an infantry officer, and where the motto was, "Follow me." In other words, I was trained to be a rifle platoon leader who was in charge of about 60, 70 men, and the job was to lead troops to battle, saying, "Follow me." I later learned that the rifle platoon leaders were the first to be killed in battle because the enemy figured that if they got rid of the first platoon leader, then perhaps the men under him would not, continue to fight. So it was as my wife's brother-in-law said, who fought in battle in both Italy and France, said that the rifle platoon leaders were almost always the first to be killed. There were so many of them that he did not even learn their names before they were killed. So somehow I was very fortunate that I did not get into battle.
Okay, so you never got into battle?
No. So then what happened is, after training as a rifle platoon leader, I went to communications officers school. So I became a communications officer instead of a rifle platoon leader. Fortunate in that respect.
Yeah. And then how long were you there for?
Well, I was as a communications officer. I was there for about a year Fort Collins, in Colorado. Yeah,
Oh,
Fort Carson, Colorado.
Fort Carson, Colorado.
Yeah.
And so then after that, what was next?
Then 2 weeks after I was discharged in June of 1954, I was married to my present wife, and then I went on to graduate school. But then I was, you might say, eligible for the GI Bill, for the Korean War GI Bill. Apparently the war was not declared over until I was, in the Army for 6 months. And therefore I had the GI Bill, which gave me benefits to go to school, which gave me, eventually as my daughter was born, I received the amount that I received was $105, just being in graduate school in 1956, and I was in graduate school for 3 years, 56 through 59, and I was receiving $105, and when my daughter was born, per month, yeah. And when my daughter was born, I had an additional $60.
And was that enough to live on?
Well, apparently it was a lot of money in those days.
And did you meet your wife in high school? Or how did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in the 9th grade. In my first year of high school, it turned out that I sat right behind her in English class, and I did not actually see what was in front of the bundle of hair, and the only thing I asked was, hey, may I borrow a pencil? You got a pencil?
And then what happened?
Then, well, back then, of course, the girls were always so superior that, I was quite shy, did not talk to any of my female classmates, but I could talk to underclass people. Yeah.
And then she went to the University of Hawaii too?
And then, yes, she went to the School of Education at the University of Hawaii, and I was studying chemistry at the university. Hardly ever saw her.
And then did you start dating in college?
Well, I did not date any of the girls because I simply did not have any money.
So then how did you end up marrying her?
Well, I guess it was in the senior year when I did work. I had at one time, actually it was in the every summer while I was in college, I worked at the pineapple cannery, and earned enough money, if I say spending money, for the rest of the year. But on my junior year, I went to ROTC training on the mainland, and after that, traveled throughout the U.S. on a Greyhound bus, sleeping in a Greyhound bus, and traveling throughout the United States, Chicago, New York City, Los Angeles, and then went back to Hawaii. But because I did not have any money earned as I usually would have earned, I had to borrow money from friends, because I could not pay the tuition, which at that time was $50 per semester.
Wow.
And so I borrowed a few bucks here and there, and I, of course, tried to repay the loans. And so I had a job as a box boy. I washed up pots at the school cafeteria. There was a university high school associated with the university. I worked at a YMCA handing out towels, and so until I finally did apply for a territorial scholarship, which I had not thought of ever doing. And when I got the scholarship, I was, you might say, rich with money. I quit my job first. The first job I quit was as a box boy at a market. I quit the job washing pots. I kept the job at the YMCA. But I also had a job as a grader of, I was an undergraduate teaching assistant, and I corrected papers. So in essence, I was quite rich compared to having no spending money. And I guess it was after that time that I actually had a date with my present wife.
What was it like working at the pineapple factory?
Well, it was hard work, and my job was as a tray boy, standing before a group of about 12 ladies and girls whose job was to put the pineapples that were sliced into cans. And my job was to place empty cans filled to the right, to the top, no more exactly. And my job was then to take the cans which were on a tray, and hence I was called a tray boy. And my job was to have empty cans ready for the ladies, and when they're full, to then stack it up, in a pile. In fact, a pile which was higher than my height, and so my job was then to try to get it placed. And when you first started, you could not put the tray so that the backside was higher than the front, because as you did that, all the cans would come spilling on you. And that happened to me. And of course, the ladies and girls thought it was so much fun to see this green tray boy with having the pineapples come spilling down on him. Yeah.
So after you finished graduate school,
yeah,
how did you end up? Did you go straight to Claremont from graduate school?
Yes, what happened is typically it took about 5 years on the average to finish your PhD. But after I'd finished 2 years, my research director, came to me with an announcement of a job. And now my fellow graduate students said, what are you, your research director thinks that you're ready, that they would immediately jump and apply for a job. So actually, I think I was a victim of fortunate circumstances. Throughout my life, I've been extremely lucky in having things like this happen. For example, I was the first, you might say, graduate student for a professor, Ted Brown, who was a genius. And I had a terrific, feeling that of not being competent, because he had a photographic memory. And he could remember things that he saw in journals, and he would recite numbers that were on the left-hand side of the page. And to me, it was just, he was the only person that I can know of who had a photographic memory. And he knew just about everything, anything. Back in those days, television sets had vacuum tubes. And he would say, oh, are you having problems with your set? Then what you need to do is replace this tube, U456 or whatever. And I couldn't even remember the names of it. But he was just a person with an amazing memory and talent. And he could argue, for example, any position compared to the other professors, that he could, take up a position and he would, always be, you might say, the person who knew everything. Yeah.
So how did you end up, how did he end up as your advisor? Or how did you end up with him?
Well, I chose him because of his talent. That is, the fact that he could, that he knew so much, and he was such a personable person. And in fact, I think I was his first student, and he didn't realize that I was a mortal person, not just an ordinary person, just a lucky guy. But he actually, suggested that I should. I'm ready to go, and he said that if he were in my position, he would definitely go to this place called Harvey Mudd College, because J. Platt is becoming president. He made a mistake. That is, the J. Platt that inspired him was J.R. Platt, who was a chemical physicist, and he thought that if J.R. Platt is stepping down from being a scientist and a philosopher to go and start a new college, he would definitely want to come to Harvey Mudd. But the mistake he made was that he remembered the J.R. Platt as J.B. Platt. He had missed a capital R instead of a B, and Joseph B. Platt was a nuclear physicist, and so and not really a philosopher. So it was a mistake that he made. That is Ted Brown made.
So after 3 years of graduate school, you applied for the job?
Well, actually, after 2.5 years, I applied for the job, and then he came to me and said, what happened? Well, actually what happened is I came here to Harvey Mudd College. That was quite an experience, because I had a friend in Los Angeles who had a sports car, and so I borrowed his sports car, drove from Los Angeles to Claremont in this Austin Healey, and people must have thought, whoa, this candidate is quite a character, yeah. And so before I knew it, he had, I had a job offer saying that we would like you to come. And, I didn't do anything until I went back and people said, what happened? I said, I don't know, they offered me a job. And so they said, you'd be a fool not to accept it. So in essence, I did not know what I was getting into. I got the job, yeah. But then there was one additional feature I did not realize until some 30 or 40 years at the college, that I was extremely fortunate that the person who hired me was almost like God to the students. His nickname was J. Arthur God. The students always considered him to be a godlike. And so in essence, Art Campbell was a god to me, and that he took care, of me throughout. And I did not realize why that he was a person who always considered me as his, you might say, as one whom he should support.
And who was he? Who was he?
J. Arthur Campbell. He was the founding, you might say, chemistry professor at Harvey Mudd College. And so I remember as soon as we came here, his wife went from Claremont to Los Angeles to buy some Japanese food, and treated us. After 2 years at the college, he even visited my mother in New Mill and my in-laws in Waimea to see what it was like. So it was only until after, he had died that I found out that he grew up under similar circumstances, and that is that his mother did everything for him in bringing him up, and apparently his father was not a person who, you might say, helped him. So he always thought that I had a similar background, and so he would try to do whatever he could to take care of me.
Yeah, and that was true of you too. Your mother was more supportive than your father.
Right.
So growing up, what was your relationship like with your mother?
Well, I was not very close to my mother. And in fact, it's just that I was away from her for so long, and even growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about your father?
My father, I had very little interactions with him, maybe language. But as a child, I remember that from the age of 8 until 18, when I left my home, it was what I did was primarily to ensure that we had enough firewood. I went around scrambling, looking for wood, to be used for our, you might say, for bathing. No hot water, no oil. And so it was wood that I scrounged and found, and so that my mother could use the wood to heat water for her laundry, or, so. And I'm so amazed that I did that for 10 years, from the age of 8 until 18.
And you found all the wood for the house?
Yeah, to get the wood for, and it meant walking some distance, maybe up to about a mile, to find pieces of wood, on the ground, or trees that I cut.
And did you have a close relationship with your siblings?
I'm sorry?
Did you have a close relationship with your siblings?
No, not really.
No.
I had very close friends, at the sugar plantation. And so, they were, you might say, classmates, same age, so we went swimming or fishing or doing whatever, but hardly with my siblings.
Yeah. So back to Claremont, when you first got to Claremont. So what was it like moving here? And
living in Claremont was, of course, nothing like I encountered. Well, for one thing, when I came to the college, I did not realize that I was the only person who was not Anglo. In other words, there were no Asians, no Hispanics, no blacks, and that I was a novelty. But I didn't realize this. And in fact, even it was only until later that I found that even my children, did not have, you might say, Asian classmates. Our daughter went from the age of 4 until 18, did not have any Asian classmates. In fact, when she was in the 10th grade, she came and said, there's a girl who looks different. And, this girl was the first person who was, you might say, Japanese. She thought it's strange that, this person had a name that she pronounced like Hispanic, but then it turned out that this person was half Korean, half Japanese. And it wasn't until she was in the 10th grade that she noticed that. The same thing with our son, who was 5 years younger, felt, I guess, did not go out with any Asian classmates, okay? And when he visited his cousins in Hawaii, they asked him, hey, it's pigeon, are you uncomfortable? You feel out of place? Because he just was unaccustomed to being with, you might say, non-Anglos.
And was that kind of strange because since you grew up in a community where it was so Japanese to raise your children?
It was. And in fact, it was later that, people asked me, did you find it difficult to buy a place in Claremont? Apparently, they had encountered no problems in actually buying a home in Claremont because they were Japanese. And I've had other friends in other communities in Southern California who, one person, who, for example, who was married to an Anglo, but when he tried to get an apartment, he was rejected. But when his spouse went to get the apartment, they got the place. In other words, there was definite prejudice against Asians.
And did you find that in your job?
No, somehow I was not, I was not exposed to that kind of feeling. Yeah.
And so, within Claremont, did you do anything to try to find other Japanese or Asian professors? Or?
No. Oh, yes. I guess in order to get Japanese food, we traveled to downtown Los Angeles, Little Tokyo, to get food. We traveled to Gardena, where there were many Japanese, and so that's where we did our shopping. There were, you might say, no foods that were Asians as you now find common.
Yeah.
I remember, seeing an advertisement that we sell fresh fish, and I thought, boy, this is great. I could just, nothing but fresh fish in Pomona. And so I said, I'll try it to buy some sashimi. And when I, went to buy a quarter pound of the fish and tried to, was assured that, this is fresh, nothing but the freshest of fish. And then when I sliced it and just brought it to taste it, I could still sense that it was rotten. Yeah.
So what was the hardest part about being one of the only Japanese families in Claremont?
Well, I did not, people were outwardly nice to me as far. In fact, so nice that when we went to church at the UCC church, it was so embarrassing that where the elder people would say, "Welcome to our country," and here we were in Claremont for over 15 years, and I was treated by strangers like a person from abroad. And so eventually I stopped going to church because of
that.
Yeah. Of course, both our sons and daughters went through Sunday school and church school, and even through high school.
Was that hard to have people assume that you were from abroad?
No. They were happy with the people, the ministers that they met. But as far as I was concerned, I was, you might say, not religious. Yeah.
What do you think it was hard for your kids?
I'm sorry.
Was it hard for your kids?
No, I think as far as they were concerned, they enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah. But what about being the only Asian kid in their class?
I think they simply accepted it. They had no problems with it.
Yeah. How would you describe your identity?
Well, my identity throughout has been, I was, you might say, again, very fortunate in the work that I did. And for one thing, I had extremely talented students who really made me look good. That is, I was a pedestrian professor, but it turned out that my students, the students who worked with me, did exceedingly well. That the scientific community thought or felt that I must have been the person who, did. Who led them to what they are. But I personally feel that they looked at me and said, if he could be a professor, I could be an even better professor. So in that respect, I guess I felt that they were encouraged by my example of being, But anyway, that gives me the greatest satisfaction when I look back at the people who worked with me. Yeah. In fact, now we have students from the classes of 1960s, and is that in 2013, the class of 1963 came back for their 50th anniversary, and this one student came up to me and said, Professor Kubota, may I have permission to take your photo? First time in my life that someone had ever asked me permission. But then it turned out that Michael G. Wilson is so well known as a producer and writer and actor for the James Bond movies.
Really?
Yeah. And, I still remember in 1961, 62, when he used to talk about, this is another one of our movies. And I said, how could it be, their movies? It turned out that Michael Wilson's mother was Mrs. Alfred Broccoli, who is, known for all the James Bond movies.
Oh, really?
But after, he asked me if he could have permission, I said, oh, great, now may I take your picture? Now, I should have been smarter by having me with him in a picture instead of my taking his picture. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So you think that your biggest sense of pride has been your professional career?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I feel quite happy now when I think of how well my students have done.
Yeah.
And even recently, I noticed that the class of 1966 is coming back for their 50th. And then I said, I've looked up, you might say, papers that my students had written. Actually, what happened is that after they had done some experiments, I would write up the paper. And so one in particular, was Michael Saylor, who's a professor at UC San Diego. he's well known, over 150, 200 papers. And when he came to give a lecture at the college, I looked up one of our papers that I had written. And so I said, here is a paper that I'd like you to have, which was his first paper of over 200 papers that he's credited for. And
it's published?
Yeah, which was published. And he said, yes, that paper came up when I was in my second year of graduate school. And he said, things weren't going so well. And of all things, here came this paper, and his classmates said, Michael, you're famous. Look at what you've done. And so that's the way it turned out. And there are many others like this. For example, I had an appointment as a professor at Cambridge University. In the Cambridge system, there's only one professor for each of the disciplines, like inorganic chemistry, organic, or whatever. It turned out that the professor of inorganic chemistry was elevated to become a lord. That is a member where he had been a knight, so he was Professor Sir Jack Lewis became Lord, you might say, and he was known as Lord Lewis. And so the technician said, it's not fair, we organic chemistry, physical chemistry, and other, have a professor, but we do not have. We have our Lord, Lord Lewis. And so they put up on my office, Professor Kubota. And boy, it really brought out benefits, And even in 1973, when I was a scholar at the Sussex University, and our son Keith was in the 10th grade, was having some problems with the principal of the school. So the secretary says, why don't you go to talk to the principal and tell you that you are Professor Kubota? And it was just amazing that, just the title professor, brought so much honor.
What kind of trouble was Keith in 10th grade? What kind of trouble was Keith in 10th grade?
10? Well, it was, for one thing, he had to wear short pants, and and
to wear short pants.
Yeah, and our daughter Lynn had to wear a uniform.
Oh, in 10th grade?
In high school. Yeah, she went to a girls' school, and
I thought Keith was in 5th grade.
Now Keith would have been 10 years old.
Okay.
And apparently, for one thing, they thought that he was a curiosity, They thought he was Chinese or something, and they thought that American kids don't know anything about soccer, not realizing that our son had played soccer from the time he was in kindergarten. So they were so surprised that he could play soccer, quite unlike many of the Americans. But
So do you think it was harder for the kids to adjust in England?
I'm sorry.
Was it kind of hard for the kids to adjust to living in England?
I think it was. They had to keep, notebooks and not scratch paper. So everything was original.
Everything else.
Yeah. And especially for Lynn, where she had, at the age of 15, she had to have so many special courses in, you might say, chemistry, physics, math, which was quite unlike the American system. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can stop for today, but we'll do more next time.